Hello again. We have now reached chapter 6 in our readings from the book What is Man? Adam, Alien or Ape? And chapter 6 begins the section of the book which is devoted to man's place in the biosphere, that is to say, in the realm of living things. Normally, I do not read the introduction to the chapter before I start the chapter, but I think because we're beginning a new part of the book, it might be helpful for me to do so. So I'm going to start by reading the introduction. Plenty of animals can express the fact that they are hungry, wrote Julian Huxley in 1947. But none except man can ask for an egg or a banana. Close quote. You probably didn't need Huxley to tell you that. The differences between humans and even the most intelligent of other living creatures are not exactly subtle. We open this chapter by pointing out that human beings are, for example, the only life form known to worry about such things as death and taxes, the two things that Benjamin Franklin said were inevitable. But although everyone knows that man is indeed unique, we are constantly assured by experts and media that we are, after all, nothing but clever apes. Evolution simply dealt us a good hand and gave us a lucky break. In this chapter, we're going to question that claim and find it cannot begin to explain what evolutionist Theodosius Dobzhansky called the biological uniqueness of man. We focus on the huge difference between ourselves and our alleged closest relative, the chimpanzee, and we go in search of the last common ancestor, LCA, last common ancestor, from which both species are said to have diverged some 7 to 13 million years ago. We are not alone in failing to identify any likely candidate. It turns out that common ancestors are decidedly uncommon, and the LCA we're looking for either never existed or else bore a surprising resemblance to a chimpanzee. And that leaves us with no materialistic explanation whatever for the amazing uniqueness of man. Chapter 6 is entitled Death and Taxes and subtitled Human Uniqueness. It begins with a quotation from Theodosius Dobzhansky in 1958. The most pressing problem of evolutionary biology seems at present to belong to two groups: those concerned with the mechanics of evolution and those dealing with the biological uniqueness of man. Writing to the French scientist Jean-Baptiste Leroy in 1789, Benjamin Franklin, 1706 to 1790, declared, "Nothing is certain except death and taxes." Franklin was actually referring to the USA's Constitution, which had been adopted in Philadelphia 2 years earlier. But the generality of his bon mot was quickly appreciated and widely quoted, and still is today. What is seldom recognized, however, is the curious fact that among the millions of living species that inhabit planet Earth, the only one that actually cares about death and taxes is Homo sapiens, which neatly flags up the uniqueness of mankind among living organisms. Man's uniqueness is something people take for granted. Yet at the same time, we unthinkingly buy into the idea that we are just highly evolved animals who differ from our animal precursors only in degree and not in essence. This, at least, is the narrative that has come to dominate Western thought in recent decades. But is it true? In this chapter, we'll begin to examine what Dobzhansky called the biological uniqueness of man. And Dobzhansky was one of the founding fathers of the modern Darwinian evolutionary synthesis, so-called. But let's start with taxes. They are by no means a recent innovation, as some might think, but an almost inevitable consequence of the way human society works. Many other creatures form societies, from ants to elephants and bees to basking sharks, but they are blissfully ignorant of taxation. It is a phenomenon both unique to and universal among humans. Even the most primitive societies pay taxes in some form or other. They may consist of tribute to chiefs and rulers, or to witch doctors and shamans for protecting them from real or imaginary evil. Material and monetary offerings to God or gods were, and still are, commonly used to support priestly castes. These may not be taxes as we know them, but a tax by any other name is still a tax. As far as I am aware, all developed civilizations, no matter how ancient, have had a system of taxation. I would be very surprised to learn of any human social structure that did not tax its members in some way or another. Yet even the most highly organized animal societies, where every individual knows its place and function, are wholly innocent of the concept. This illustrates Raymond Tallis's arguments, cited in Chapter 1, that, quote, the human world is materially rooted in the natural world, but is quite different from it. It is populated by individuals who are not just organisms, but who inhabit an acknowledged shared public sphere, structured and underpinned by an infinity of abstractions, generalizations, customs, practices, norms, laws, institutions, facts, and artifacts unknown to even the most social of animals. Close quotes. A subheading: Attitudes to Death. So much for taxes. What about death? This surely is common to all organisms. Yes, indeed. But the attitude to death adopted by human beings is decidedly different from that of every other sentient species. Most of us perceive death as a serious misfortune. It is something we don't like to talk about, yet it holds a strange and undeniable fascination for us. Pick up any daily newspaper and count how many column inches are devoted to death, whether through illness, accident, murder, or war. My newspaper today has 22 pages of general world news, of which the equivalent of 4 pages are devoted to death in one form or another, plus a further 3 pages of formal obituaries. That's a total of 27% of relevant content. Bookshop shelves are loaded with whodunit novels and murder mysteries, and most of us enjoy reading such materials, as long as the culprit is suitably punished, of course. No television drama or detective series is complete without multiple deaths. Our fear and fascination over death appears to be deeply ingrained. Animals don't bury or cremate their dead, but humans have always done so, usually with a degree of ceremony. There are some apparent exceptions. For a BBC website states, for example, a BBC website states, quotes, elephants are known to bury their own dead under foliage and often stay with the body apparently in mourning. A cow whose calf has died will often stay with the dead baby for days, according to the Kenya Wildlife Service, close quotes. However, it is all too easy to attribute human thoughts to animals, and such actions could be explained more simply. The mothers in question may simply be shielding from the elements what they think is a sick calf and waiting in the hope that it will recover. There have also been accounts of whales and dolphins gathering around a dead offspring and even carrying it for days on end. For example, quotation, scientists in the Red Sea observed a bottlenose dolphin push a smaller deceased dolphin through the water on its fin. The dolphin was badly decayed and had probably been dead a while. A killer whale, which had recently given birth, was seen carrying a dead newborn in her mouth. She was trying to keep the dead calf up at the surface the entire time, says study co-author Robin Baird. The animals go through a period when they're experiencing the same kind of emotions you or I would when a loved one dies, close quotes. However, such observations are rare. The last report is based on just 14 events. And the article sensibly warns, quotes, when we hear news like this, we have to be careful to get all the facts and not anthropomorphize the situation, close quotes. As with elephants, the behavior of these ocean mammals could arise from a belief that the offspring concerned are sick and might recover if protected and cared for. Why else would the air-breathing dolphin try to keep the dead calf above the surface? There are really no grounds for concluding that the animals concerned are mourning their dead as humans do. Subheading: Preparing for the afterlife. No animal provides its dead with equipment for the afterlife, but such practices abounded among ancient civilizations. For example, the Anthropology World website cites a National Geographic article as follows, quotes, National Geographic, 2009. National Geographic explored and discussed ancient Egyptian beliefs about life after death. According to Dr. Zahi Hawass, ancient Egyptians treated the afterlife as the beginning of a fascinating journey and engaged in unprecedented preparations for death to minimize the dangers on their way to the highest levels of resurrection and spirit. In ancient Greece, they believed that to cross the river Styx and to enter the afterlife, the deceased had to pay several coins to the ferryman. For this reason, Greeks buried their dead with several coins in their mouths. Close quotes. Many further examples can be given. The terracotta army buried with the first Chinese emperor, Qin Shi Huangdi, is a notable case. Quotes. Today, the mausoleum complex is enormous, containing thousands of clay warriors as well as other artifacts. Uncovering all of that takes time, and the dig constitutes, to this day, each discovery within Qin's lavish mausoleum offers more proof that the emperor was determined to have every earthly comfort in the afterlife. Anglo-Saxon kings were buried with boats, weapons, and other accoutrements deemed necessary for an afterlife befitting such august personages. A particularly fine example is the ship buried at Sutton Hoo in England, where, quotes, the most significant artifacts from the ship's burial displayed in the British Museum are those found in the burial chamber, including a suite of metalwork dress fittings in gold and gems, a ceremonial helmet, shield and sword, a lyre, many pieces of silver plate from Byzantium. The ship burial has prompted comparisons with the world described in the heroic poem Beowulf, which is set in southern Sweden. It is in that region that close archaeological parallels to the ship burial are found, both in general form and in details of the military equipment contained in the burial. Close quotes. These are just a few examples of a huge number of practices worldwide in which burial ceremonies and rituals demonstrate a belief in life after death. As the Anthropology World article concludes, quotes, the results of the current analysis show that most societies treat death not as a transition into nothingness, but to some other unknown state. To ensure that this transition is smooth and non-problematic, living people must engage in a predetermined set of rituals in accordance with all the cultural norms and expectations. Whether or not any particular beliefs and practices are justified or are mere superstitions is not the point at this juncture. Either way, they demonstrate that man is unique in perceiving death as a transition rather than an obliteration. This is true historically and remains true today. Subheading: Behavior, Biology, and Brains. So far in this chapter, we've looked at just two examples of the unique behavior of man. But of course, behavior is far from being the whole story. Dobzhansky wrote of the biological uniqueness of man in his 1958 article cited above. This might have been a Freudian slip, because his later writings on human uniqueness refer only to man's evolutionary uniqueness. For example, the evolutionary uniqueness of man in Evolutionary Biology, Volume 6, 1995. Biological uniqueness is, of course, compatible with a non-evolutionary origin for man. Either way, however, the uniqueness of man among sentient creatures is incontestable. Biological uniqueness can be roughly subdivided into bodily, anatomical, and physiological features, and cognitive, mind-related ones. Although body behavior and cognition are strongly interrelated, I'll put them in separate categories for convenience. And to keep this discussion within some kind of bounds, we'll concentrate on a single animal-human comparison, namely the differences between man and our allegedly closest animal relative, the chimpanzee. An article in Genome Research in 2005 addresses the difference between man and chimpanzee as follows. Note the word phenome and phenotype refer to the sum of an organism's visible characteristics, including both appearance and behavior. Quotation. We have many characteristics that are uniquely human. Table 1, in the paper of course, lists some of the definite and possible phenotypic traits that appear to differentiate us from chimpanzees. For the most part, we do not know which genetic features interact with the environment to generate these differences between the phenomes of our two species. The chimpanzee has also long been seen as a model for human diseases because of its close evolutionary relationship. Nevertheless, it is a striking paradox that chimpanzees are in fact not good models for many major human disease conditions. A table in the paper lists some 200 phenotypic traits of humans for comparison with those of the great apes under various headings. The list is headed by cultural and behavioral differences with 58 entries, and cognitive, mind-related, and social differences with 23 entries. But many other differences are listed in fields such as life history, anatomy, physiology, reproductive biology, embryology, biomechanics, cell biology, biochemistry, endocrinology, pharmacology, pathology, that is, diseases, dental biology, skin biology, nutrition, neuroanatomy, neurobiology, and neurochemistry. You don't have to know what all these words mean to recognize the huge differences between apes and man that evolution, if true, must explain. It is at best a struggle, and at worst a lost cause. Putting aside for a moment the cognitive, social, and behavioral differences, here are some of the actual biological, that is, anatomical and physiological features that distinguish humans from chimpanzees. Prolonged helplessness of the young, humans. Long childhood, humans. Adolescence. Age at first reproduction. Longevity. Bipedal gait. absence of skull crest and brow ridge, inner ear canal orientation, bone cortex thickness, laryngeal position, pharyngeal air sacs, earlobes, tear glands, structure, visible whites of the eyes, thumb movement, skeletal muscle strength, fine motor coordination, hand-eye coordination, sustained running, voluntary control of breathing, ability to swim underwater, and emotion-prompted tears. But what is the point of such comparisons? Aren't many of these differences obvious anyway? Perhaps so, but apparently not obvious enough. Evolutionists have long claimed that humans and chimpanzees diverged from a common ancestor some 5 to 7 million years ago, though recent studies have revised this upward to 13 million years. How do they know this? Because examination of the chimp and human genomes, that is, the totality of their respective DNAs, suggests that man shares with chimpanzees over 98% of his genes. The genes are DNA regions that contain the code to make proteins. They therefore conclude that chimps and humans must be separated by only a tiny step in evolutionary terms. But this is simplistic, as we shall see in the next chapter. The difference between genes is actually more like 4%, involving about 35 million single nucleotide differences in the DNA and 90 megabases of insertions and deletions. 1 megabyte is a million single letters in the DNA code, while indels are DNA sequences present in or missing from one or other of the two genomes in comparable regions. Moreover, genes constitute only about 3% of man's genome, and the difference between the complete genomes of chimps and humans may be as high as 30%. To put this in perspective, while 96% of human genes are also found in chimps, we also share some 88% of our genes with mice, 73% with zebrafish, 47% with fruit flies, 38% with roundworms, and 18% with baker's yeast. An even higher figure for fruit flies is given by the National Human Genome Research Institute, a division of USA's National Institute of Health, which states, quote, "A study discovered that about 60% of genes are conserved," that is, the same or similar, between fruit flies and humans, meaning that the two organisms appear to share a core set of genes. 2/3 of human genes known to be involved in cancer have counterparts in the fruit fly. The lesson: chimps are no more 96% human than fruit flies are 60% human. Evolution attributes these similarities to common descent, but all they really tell us is that to be alive on planet Earth, an organism needs certain indispensable proteins to capture energy, ensure its structural integrity, and provide a basic cellular kit. For now, we're going to leave it there. Our next subheading is entitled Uncommon Ancestors, but we'll deal with that and other things in the next episode.